The year is 1803. Napoleon Bonaparte is sitting in a bathtub in Paris, arguing with his brothers so violently that water is splashing onto their expensive coats. They're screaming about whether to sell a piece of land so enormous it stretches from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. A territory larger than France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Germany combined. 24 hours later, Napoleon makes his decision, and with one signature, he accidentally creates the United States as we know it. But here's what they don't teach you in school. Napoleon didn't want to sell. America didn't want to buy. And the whole deal only happened because of a slave rebellion and a disease-carrying mosquito on a tiny Caribbean island thousands of miles away. This is the story of the Louisiana Purchase, the greatest accident in American history. To most people, the Louisiana Purchase looks simple. Thomas Jefferson bought 828,000 square miles of land for $15 million, about 4 cents per acre. America doubled in size overnight. It seems like brilliant American diplomacy meeting French stupidity. But that's not what happened at all. The Louisiana Purchase wasn't about Louisiana. It was about Haiti. And to understand why Napoleon was willing to give up the heart of North America for what amounted to pocket change, we need to go back 3 years earlier, to 1800, when Napoleon had a dream. At this point, France has zero territory in North America. They'd lost Canada to the British 40 years earlier in the 7 Years' War. France was a European power with no American empire. But Napoleon has a vision he calls his Western design. He wants to rebuild French power in the Americas, not through cold forests and fur trading like the old days in Canada, but through something far more profitable: sugar, and the slavery that produces it. The centerpiece of this plan is a small island in the Caribbean called Saint-Domingue. We know it today as Haiti. In 1789, Saint-Domingue is the most valuable colony on Earth, not hyperbole, actual fact. This single island produces 40% of all the sugar consumed in Europe and 60% of the coffee. It generates more wealth for France than all 13 American colonies generated for Britain combined. They call it the Pearl of the Antilles. But this unimaginable wealth is built on unimaginable horror. 500,000 enslaved Africans work the plantations under conditions so brutal that the mortality rate requires constant importation of new captives just to maintain the workforce. People are literally being worked to death and replaced like machinery parts. Napoleon's plan is coldly logical: retake complete control of Saint-Domingue, which has been in rebellion since the French Revolution, reimpose slavery, which had been abolished during the revolutionary chaos, turn the island back into a money-printing machine. But there's a logistical problem. You can't eat sugar. The enslaved population needs food, and the entire island is devoted to cash crops. They also need lumber for sugar mills and shipping barrels. This is where Louisiana enters the picture. In Napoleon's grand strategy, Louisiana isn't meant to be a major French settlement. It's meant to be the supply depot for the sugar islands. Farmers in the Mississippi Valley would grow corn, wheat, and salt pork. They'd harvest cypress lumber, load it onto barges, float it down to New Orleans, and ship it to Saint-Domingue to feed the slaves producing sugar. Louisiana is simply logistical support, the farm that feeds the factory. So in 1800, Napoleon makes a secret deal with Spain, which currently controls Louisiana. In the Treaty of San Ildefonso, Spain agrees to return Louisiana to France. In exchange, Napoleon promises to create a kingdom in Italy for the Spanish king's son-in-law, a classic dynastic swap, a chunk of Italy for the middle of North America. The deal is kept secret because Napoleon doesn't want to alarm the British or Americans until everything's in place. But first, he needs to secure Saint-Domingue. The island is currently controlled by Toussaint Louverture, a former slave who's become a brilliant general and the de facto ruler of the colony. Technically, he's loyal to France, but he governs independently, has written his own constitution, and negotiates trade deals with America. He's essentially a black Napoleon, and the real Napoleon cannot tolerate a rival. In 1801, Napoleon assembles a massive invasion force, 20,000 of France's best troops, veterans who conquered Italy and Egypt, led by his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc. Their orders are brutal and methodical. Deceive Toussaint with peace offers. Then arrest and deport him, disarm the black population. Finally, restore slavery. It's treachery disguised as diplomacy. The expedition arrives in Haiti in February 1802. Initially, it goes well. Superior French firepower captures the coastal cities. Toussaint realizes he can't win conventional battles, so he retreats into the mountains and wages guerrilla war, burning plantations, poisoning wells, destroying everything of value. He tells his officers they must wait for their greatest ally to arrive. That ally? The rainy season. Toussaint famously declares, "The insects will be our soldiers." General Leclerc is arrogant. He writes letters to Napoleon boasting he'll pacify the island in weeks. He tricks Toussaint into a meeting, arrests him, and ships him to a freezing prison in the French mountains where the great liberator dies of pneumonia and neglect. With Toussaint gone, Leclerc thinks the war is over. He's catastrophically wrong. News arrives that France has restored slavery on the nearby island of Guadeloupe. The black population of Saint-Domingue realizes the same fate awaits them. They rise in a second, even more ferocious rebellion. The slogan becomes, "Independence or death." And then the rains come. The yellow fever epidemic of 1802 is one of the worst in recorded history. French soldiers with no immunity begin dying by the thousands. It starts with headaches and fever. Then skin turns yellow. Eyes become bloodshot. Then comes the black vomit, internal bleeding pouring from the mouth. Within days, strong, healthy men are corpses. Hospitals overflow. Bodies pile in streets because there aren't enough living men to bury the dead. General Leclerc watches his magnificent army dissolve. He writes desperate letters begging Napoleon for reinforcements. "I have no army left. I have only a hospital." By the end of 1802, Leclerc himself is dead from the fever. Of the 20,000 men Napoleon sent, only a few thousand remain. And they're terrified. Napoleon sends another 20,000 troops. They die just as quickly. French historians later estimate that 50,000 French soldiers, sailors, and administrators died in the attempt to retake Saint-Domingue. It's a catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale. Napoleon's Western design is drowning in blood and vomit. Napoleon is many things, but he's not sentimental. He's a cold pragmatist. He sits in his office in the Tuileries Palace, reads the casualty reports, and does the math. Without Saint-Domingue, Louisiana is worthless. If there's no sugar colony to feed, there's no need for a supply depot. Louisiana generates no tax revenue. It's populated by a few thousand French settlers and thousands of Native American nations who have zero interest in French rule. Holding it would require thousands of troops to garrison Mississippi River forts, but those troops are either dying in the Caribbean or needed in Europe. And Europe is becoming dangerous again. The Peace of Amiens, which temporarily paused war between France and Britain, is collapsing. Napoleon knows war is coming, and he knows that the moment war is declared, the British Navy will blockade French ports. Britain rules the seas. Louisiana becomes completely indefensible. The British Navy could sail into the Gulf of Mexico and seize New Orleans whenever they want. British troops in Canada could march south and take the upper Mississippi. France has no way to protect the colony. Napoleon faces a brutal choice. Try to hold Louisiana and inevitably lose it to Britain for free as a spoil of war. Or sell it to the Americans, get some money to fund his European campaigns, and, more strategically, strengthen a future rival to Britain. Napoleon famously says, "I have given England a maritime rival that will sooner or later humble her pride." He decides to sell. Meanwhile, the Americans have no idea any of this is happening. They're not thinking about empire. They're thinking about shipping crates. For Americans, the Louisiana issue is simple: access to the Mississippi River. The entire economy of Western territories, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, depends on the river. Farmers float whiskey and flour down to New Orleans, where it's loaded onto ocean-going ships. Spain had allowed Americans to use the port tax-free under the right of deposit. But in 1802, just as France is preparing to take over, the Spanish governor suddenly revokes this right. The river is closed. The American economy panics. Western farmers talk about seizing New Orleans by force. President Thomas Jefferson is a pacifist, but he knows he must act. He writes that there is one single spot on Earth whose possessor is America's natural and habitual enemy. That spot is New Orleans. Jefferson is terrified of having Napoleon as a neighbor. Spain is weak and manageable, but France is a predator. He fears French troops will shut down the river permanently, that America will be forced to ally with Britain against France, an idea he finds repulsive but sees as potentially necessary. So Jefferson makes his move. He sends James Monroe to Paris. Monroe's mission is simple and modest. Offer Napoleon up to $10 million for the city of New Orleans and immediate surrounding area. That's it. The Americans don't want millions of acres of wilderness. They just want the port, just want to secure the river's mouth. Monroe carries backup instructions. If France refuses, go to London and negotiate an alliance with Britain. It's diplomatic poker, high stakes, but limited goals. Monroe set sail in March 1803, crossing the Atlantic slowly, completely unaware of the catastrophe unfolding in Haiti, unaware that Napoleon has already decided to liquidate the entire territory. When Monroe arrives in Paris expecting difficult negotiations, he meets Robert Livingston, the American ambassador who's been trying for months to get meetings with French officials. Livingston is frustrated, partially deaf, and feels ignored by the French court. On April 11th, 1803, French Foreign Minister Talleyrand finally summons Livingston. Talleyrand looks at the American and asks a question that stuns him. "What will you give for the whole of Louisiana?" Livingston thinks he's misheard. "No, we only want New Orleans." Talleyrand smiles. "Think about the whole thing. Napoleon wants to sell everything." Livingston goes home in shock. When Monroe arrives the next day, Livingston delivers the news. They came to buy a city. They're being offered a continent. They look at their instructions. Jefferson authorized $10 million for New Orleans. They have no authority to spend $15 million on the entire territory. They have no way to contact Washington. A letter takes 6 weeks each way. By then, Napoleon might change his mind. The British might declare war and seize the territory. Monroe and Livingston are alone in Paris, facing the biggest decision in American history. If they say yes, they might be impeached for exceeding authority. If they say no, they lose the opportunity of a lifetime. They look at each other and decide to go rogue. They decide to buy a continent. The negotiation isn't about borders. Nobody knows what those are. When Livingston asks about boundaries, Talleyrand famously shrugs. "I do not know. You must take it as we received it from Spain." The negotiation is entirely about money. Final price, $15 million, a staggering sum for the young republic. The entire federal budget in 1803 is only $8 million. Jefferson is effectively spending 2 years of national income on a single purchase. But here's the problem. The United States doesn't have $15 million. They're land rich, but cash poor. So how do you pay for an empire when you're broke? Enter British bankers. The US issues bonds, essentially IOUs, promising to repay with interest over 15 years. But Napoleon can't pay soldiers with American IOUs. He needs gold. So Baring Brothers, one of London's most powerful merchant banks, steps in. They buy the American bonds at a discount, giving Napoleon immediate hard cash. They then sell the bonds to European investors. Think about the irony. British bankers are raising money from British investors to give Napoleon cash so he can build an army to invade Britain. It seems like treason. But to the bankers, it's just business. The treaty is signed April 30th, 1803. As they sign, Robert Livingston stands and makes a prophecy. "We have lived long, but this is the noblest work of our whole lives. From this day, the United States takes its place among the powers of the first rank." Back in Washington, Thomas Jefferson is having a constitutional crisis. Jefferson is a strict constitutionalist. He spent his career arguing the federal government can only do what the Constitution explicitly permits. Now he searches the Constitution and finds nothing authorizing the president to purchase foreign territory. He's becoming what he hates, someone who ignores the law for convenience. He drafts a constitutional amendment to legalize the deal, but advisors tell him there's no time. Napoleon might change his mind. Jefferson agonizes, then swallows his principles. He justifies it as necessary for the agrarian republic he envisions. He needs land for yeoman farmers. The Senate ratifies the treaty. America doubles in size. The transfer is bizarre political theater. Spain still officially governs Louisiana, so before France can give it to America, Spain must give it to France. On November 30th, 1803, in New Orleans, the Spanish flag comes down. The French tricolor goes up. France rules Louisiana for exactly 20 days. Then, on December 20th, in cold rain, the French flag comes down. The American flag goes up. The two flags tangle briefly in the middle of the pole, a fitting symbol. The crowd, mostly French and Spanish residents, stands in confused silence. They weren't consulted, their nationality changed by a signature 3,000 miles away. But the true victims are the native Americans. To them, the idea that Napoleon could sell their land to Jefferson is absurd. They've never heard of Napoleon. They're the masters of the plains. But the Louisiana Purchase changes the legal framework of their dispossession. Before 1803, the U.S. had to treat them as foreign powers outside American borders. After 1803, America considers them subjects living within American territory. It gives Jefferson legal cover to begin removal policies. The Trail of Tears becomes possible because there's now a destination. That destination is the Louisiana Territory. The Purchase also plants the seeds of the Civil War. As long as America was confined to the East, the balance between slave and free states could be managed. But with this vast new territory, every new state raises the question, slave or free? This question plagues American politics for 60 years. The Missouri Compromise, Kansas-Nebraska Act, Dred Scott decision, all direct consequences of the Louisiana Purchase. The land bought to secure the Union eventually tears it apart. And Napoleon? He spends his $15 million building invasion barges at Boulogne. But he never crosses the English Channel. The British Navy is too strong. In 1805, at Trafalgar, Lord Nelson destroys the French fleet. The invasion dream dies. Napoleon turns east, marches across Europe, wins brilliant victories, creates a continental empire that collapses in Russian snow a decade later. The 15 million bought him a few years of war, but it cost France superpower status. If France had kept Louisiana, North America might have been divided between English-speaking and French-speaking nations. The United States might have remained a regional power. By selling, Napoleon removed the last barrier to American expansion. He created the giant that would return to Europe in 1917 and 1944 to save France. Today, walk through New Orleans' French Quarter, and you see the ghosts of this history. Spanish architecture, French street names, food mixing African, Native American, and European traditions. A city that remembers being a pawn in global chess. But the most important monument isn't a building. It's the map of the United States itself, the shape of a nation that spans a continent. This wasn't forged by destiny or divine providence. It was forged by yellow fever mosquitoes in Haitian swamps, by the resistance of Toussaint Louverture and former slaves who broke the French Empire's will. We learn history as great men making great decisions. Jefferson the visionary, Napoleon the genius. But the Louisiana Purchase teaches a different lesson. History is chaos driven by unintended consequences. Jefferson didn't want the whole territory, just a city. Napoleon didn't want to sell. He was forced by disease and defeat. America didn't have the money. They borrowed it from the seller's enemy. It was a fire sale, a liquidation of a failed business venture. The French Empire in the Americas went bankrupt, and America bought the assets for pennies on the dollar. The bitter irony? The slaves of Haiti, who fought for their own freedom and destroyed Napoleon's Western dream, inadvertently doubled the size of a slave republic in North America. Their victory for liberty in the Caribbean led to slavery's expansion in the Mississippi Valley. It's a complex, painful legacy. So next time you look at a map of the American West, remember, you're looking at the debris of a French catastrophe, the result of a bad day in a Parisian bathtub, the legacy of Caribbean mosquitoes. The Louisiana Purchase wasn't a triumph of American diplomacy. It was the greatest lucky break in the history of nations, a gift from the chaos of a world at war. If you want to see how other empires unraveled in ways nobody expected, make sure to subscribe. History is full of accidents that changed everything. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.